Hello and welcome to this strategic analysis video as part of the Astranti Strategic Pre-Scene Analysis video series for the February 2020 Strategic Case Study exam on coffee pod producer Shinepodd. And I'm sure you're all familiar with the case by now, but we'll just do a very quick, very brief introduction. And essentially, the focus of the strategic case study for the February 2020 exam is on the coffee pod industry. And I'm sure this is something that we're all probably familiar with. We've used coffee pods, or we've at least consumed coffee before in our lives, but not many of us perhaps know the actual logistics behind the industry. And I've got a very brief overview of the organization here. So it's a public company, traded on the Midland stock market, and a global company as well, trades all over the world, gets supplies from all over the world, but the company itself is based in the country of Midland. So let's take a look at the organization and how we are going to review the company within this strategic analysis video by using the rational model. So we're going to look at where the organization currently is, using various different models, internal analysis models, the business environment models, Pestel, Five Forces, the value chain, etc. We're going to look at where it wants to be, looking at its missions, its objective, its performance, measurement, its stakeholders, the ethical obligations of the organization. And then finally, we'll look at how they are going to get there, looking at the various different strategies they can use, different methods of growth, etc. We're going to start the video by looking at where they want to be. What is the ultimate aim of the organization? Where is it heading? And where the organization is heading can often be summarized in the mission statement. It's very important that a mission statement does embody what the organization is all about, what it is trying to achieve, who it exists for, why does it exist. And a good mission statement should answer these questions. And one of the best models for using to understand the mission statement, understand the quality of the mission statement, or what a good mission statement should contain, is the Campbell's mission statement. And this is split into four key elements. And these are the purpose, the strategy, the values, and the policies within the organization. So let's take a look at Shinepodd's mission statement and see how it compares to these four key elements. So this is the Shinepodd mission statement. Shinepodd's mission is to succeed by meeting our customers' needs for excellent coffee and our shareholders' needs for a strong return on their investment. So when we're looking at the purpose of the organization, why does it exist? For who does it exist? And what does the organization hope to achieve in the long run? You can see here that two key stakeholders that have been mentioned in the mission statement are the customers and also the shareholders. So it exists to provide customers with excellent coffee, and it exists to provide shareholders with a strong return on their investment. And one thing that you should be thinking of when you are looking at mission statements, when you are looking at the purposes of the organization, the strategy of the organization, is think how it will affect your answers in the exam. Remember that with the pre-scene, the questions you are given are not going to be based purely on the pre-scene. The pre-scene is the background information to bring you up to speed so you can play the role of a senior manager within the finance function at this organization. And so a great way of analyzing it is to think of it as the context, as the background that influences your decisions. So if we are perhaps proposed with a question in the exam that maybe goes against providing our customers with excellent coffee, or perhaps is going to go against our ability to provide our shareholders with a strong return on their investment, then we know from our knowledge of the pre-scene, our knowledge of the mission statements of Shinepodd, that that is potentially not suitable for us as an organization, because our purpose, our objective is to provide excellent coffee, is to provide a strong return on investment. So that's the purpose. What about the strategy? Strategy looks at how the organization is going to compete, the range of businesses it is operating within. Well, we know we operate in the coffee market, and we also look to provide excellent coffee. So how we are competing is perhaps by providing a service or a coffee service that is better than the competitors. We provide excellent coffee. And those of you who have already read through the pre-scene or have watched the pre-scene analysis videos will know that the subject of quality came up time and time again. Everything the organization did was about quality, was about building a brand, building a reputation, and having this perception of luxury, a very high market brand. And that's also prevalent here in the values, what the organization stands for. It stands for quality. Value for money was not something that was regularly mentioned. Price, being cheap, being affordable, etc., was not mentioned at all. It's all about quality. So that ties in here with this idea of excellent coffee, is to provide coffee of the highest level of quality. And that is useful for the organization because it looks at how we compete. It looks at what kinds of needs our customers have. And so when we're thinking about price, we know that there is a big risk in the organization, as mentioned in the statements, about the fluctuations in the commodity markets and potentially whether we were going to have to absorb the prices of these fluctuations or whether they would be passed on to the consumer. And there was an article about how organizations had essentially won a court case that meant they didn't have to absorb it themselves. They could pass it on to the consumer. And this is relevant more so for perhaps the businesses that compete on price rather than the businesses that compete on quality. We know that consumers of Shinepodd coffee do not use Shinepodd coffee for the price. They're not super price conscious. They're not with us because we are the cheapest. We're not the cheapest. They're with us because we are the best, and they don't mind paying more for that quality. And therefore, it means that we can, in a sense, pass the additional costs onto the consumer because the consumer, within reason, is willing to pay more for the quality. So it's far more important that we keep the quality levels high rather than worrying about keeping our prices down. And the final element are the policies. And these are things that people within the organization expect to follow to act in accordance with these defined values. So we didn't necessarily make it into the mission statement, but these are things that various different senior managers, etc., within the organization have to ensure that people working for the company follow. And there were quite a few things that the organization cared about, which would ultimately go to helping achieve its purpose, achieve its strategy, achieve its values, and things like ethics and being an ethical organization, treating the plantation workers at our various different suppliers fairly, etc., and ensuring that those are kept up. Ensuring that people within the organization respect that. And so some of that didn't make it through into the mission statement, but again, if we look at the various different values, what the company stands for within that same section of the pre-scene, a lot more to do with the environment, a lot more to do with the welfare of workers, etc., was present. So the policies that the people within the organization expected to follow were quite clear as well. And that also helps with the building of the brand. We're in a era where social media has meant that negativities can spread very, very quickly, and a lot of people will be aware of them, and also where the general social consciousness of individuals is much, much higher than before. The younger generations, millennial generations, Generation Zs, etc., are starting to become bigger and bigger proportions of the economy, and these are the kinds of policies, the kinds of things that these groups of people do respect. They want to be getting excellent coffee, but they want to buy coffee from an organization that cares about the environment, that recycles well, that treats the plantation workers in developing countries well. So it's very important for the continued success and for the brand of the organization to ensure that these additional ethical responsibilities are adhered to. So the mission statement looked at what the organisation was trying to achieve, what it ultimately wanted to be. Let's look at how we are going to measure how well we are doing with regards to getting there. And there was no actual mention of performance measurement within the organisation, which was quite strange considering that they had all these different plans, all these different things that they wanted to achieve. There was no way of actually quantifying and scoring how well they were doing with regards to achieving those. And the most popular method, and the method that is often used in the CIMA syllabus and very prevalent throughout the CIMA syllabus, is that of the Balanced Scorecard. And the great thing about the Balanced Scorecard is it doesn't just focus on the financials, which is something that accountants can often focus on too much. Instead, it looks at all these different perspectives. So it looks at the financial perspective, more traditional, how's it doing economically, internal perspective, looking at your operations, looking at your employees, learning and growth perspective, which looks at the advancements that you are making, the number of new innovations and projects you're bringing in for an organization such as Shinepodd. It could be something like the number of new varieties, new blends, etc. that are being produced. And also the customer perspective, so looking at the number of customers, how many of those are repeat customers, which should be quite easy for this organization to track because it's all sold online. And also looking at the satisfaction, looking at the complaints that you're getting, etc., over the quality of your coffee. And return on investment is a particularly important measure here, given that the mission statement of the organization was to ensure that shareholders are getting a good return on their investment. But also need to think about internally how well we are utilizing the employees that we have, looking at the various different roasting jobs, etc., how successful they are, the quality of them, how satisfied staff are. Remember, staff are very important to this organization. They mentioned repeatedly in the pre-scene about the importance of highly skilled roasters. In fact, it mentioned the phrase in several different sections of the pre-scene, including the blog posts by the CEO, that the actual roasting process is one that requires experience, that requires a very high level of skill. And when you have very skilled employees who are very critical to the success of an organization, remember, this organization is about quality. It's not about we'll get in any old roaster because we're just trying to make it as cheaply as possible. It's all about getting the coffee as high as possible in terms of quality. And the roasting process is where this can be made or broken. And so it's very important that we keep those staff satisfied, because I'm sure there's plenty of other coffee organizations in the world that would like to take our very highly trained, very highly skilled roasters away from us. And we know that there are other organizations that exist, because CAFHAM was one that was mentioned specifically in the pre-scene. And another thing that I want to mention here is this whole idea of recycling initiatives. And this was one of the big issues that came up repeatedly in the exam, was the problems with recycling Shinepodd coffee pods, and how the organization had tried to make it easy for the consumer by providing them with a bag and collecting that bag when they would get their next delivery in, but it just isn't particularly feasible because of the spillages from the coffee pods, from the fact that they cannot be recycled in traditional and conventional ways. They have to be recycled by us here at Shinepodd, and the fact that we only ship in boxes of 100. So if you've got a household, and let's say there's 2 people within that household, and on average they consume 2 cups of coffee a day each, then that's still almost a month that goes by before the next order of coffee pods. And so if you've got up to 100 leaking, smelling coffee pods that just have to be kept in a bag in your kitchen, that's not really feasible. And the article specifically mentioned, several articles in fact, mentioned that people would be more willing to recycle their coffee pods if it was easier to recycle them. And then the actual CEO of the organization started pleading with people to recycle more, and people responding saying, well, it's so difficult, can't you make it easier to recycle? I'd recycle more if you could make it easier. And so there's really an emphasis on us, if we're going to practice what we preach about being environmentally friendly, caring about recycling, etc., we need to take steps to make it easier. And that was something that was actually mentioned in the risk report as well. So the next section relates to governance. I'll briefly give you an overview of the theory of governance before going on to the specific parts related to the case. So essentially, governance is the way in which organisations are directed, administered and controlled with the aim of ensuring that the organisation is run in a way that is right for all stakeholders. So essentially, ensuring that a business is run to benefit the stakeholders and society as a whole. So, it sounds very good. And it's worth noting that this is only applicable to UK companies and listed companies at that, companies that trade on the stock exchange. But that's not to say that there aren't things that we can take from this and apply to any organisation. It doesn't matter where that organisation is based. Just as in our case, it's not based in the UK. And it doesn't even matter if the company isn't listed, because of course it's all about running the business in the best possible way. So just because you don't have to do it doesn't mean that you couldn't gain from it. Let's take a look at some of the few key factors from the Code of Governance. What is considered good governance? And that's having a separate chairman and CEO. Of course, the CEO is head of the organisation, and the board is ahead of the CEO. And so the CEO runs the organisation on behalf of the board, and then the chairman is the head of the board. So if you had a situation where the same person was the chairman and the CEO, they might be setting themselves targets they know they'll be able to achieve. So they're not pushing the company, trying to get the most out of the company, trying to achieve its potential. The chairman is just setting themselves easy targets that they know they'll be able to achieve so they can get their bonuses. Independent non-executive directors. These are people who are not employed by the organisation. They sit on the board to, in a sense, act as the control for the executive directors, to ensure that the executive directors are running the organisation in a way that is beneficial for stakeholders and not for themselves. This, of course, it goes some way to removing the issues caused with the agency problem. Now, agency problem is essentially where directors are running the organisation on behalf of the shareholders. Now, the shareholders own the company, the directors don't, but the directors are in charge of the company. So the directors perhaps aren't necessarily interested in the long-term viability of the organisation. They perhaps are more interested in their short-term gains. So they may leverage long-term sustainability, long-term growth for short successes, small successes, so that they can boost the share price of the organisation, so that they can boost the dividends paid out to the shareholders and get their bonuses and move on. And so that's the point of the non-executive directors. Non-executive directors also need to be people who are skilled, knowledgeable, not just any old person. They need to know whether what the executive directors are doing is right or wrong, and they have to be firm as well. There's a tendency for independent NEDs to not rock the boat because they're paid quite a handsome stipend for doing it. It's only a few days a year job, and so a lot of them don't bother doing it, or don't bother sort of standing up, rocking the boat, where of course they have to. That is their job. And one of the main jobs for the NEDs is to sit on the Audit, Nomination and Remuneration Committees. Now, these are 3 different committees that, in a sense, are the essence of what governance is, ensuring that everything is done fairly and ethically. That's the Audit Committee, ensuring that executive directors are not using company funds to fund business trips and golf trips that the shareholders wouldn't approve of. For example, if an executive director is taking a client to Dubai for 2 weeks to discuss a business opportunity on the company's dime in a 5-star hotel, well, It could have just been a couple of hours meeting at the company's office. That would have been enough. Yet they chose to go on holiday for 2 weeks in a 5-star hotel. That's not an effective, efficient, correct use of company money, and that's the kind of thing that the audit committee is responsible for stopping. The nomination committee are in charge of selecting people to sit on the board, selecting the executive directors. And this is to ensure that the chairman or the CEO doesn't simply bring their son or their daughter or their husband or their wife on board to the company to earn extra money for the family, to give them an opportunity. No, it needs to be someone who is right for the job, someone who is experienced, someone who has knowledge in the industry, and generally someone who is not related to other members of the board, because this, of course, affects their independence, this affects their ability to think, and perhaps increases the chance of them being biased. And remuneration committees as well. These are the committee, this is the committee responsible for deciding the pay on the directors. And this is because directors' pay and the list of directors has to be disclosed to the public. And so, of course, it's important to come across with to come out with a fair level of payment. If the company that you work for is not doing so well, it made X million in losses and it's got to lay off employees, but then it's also found out that the director had a £40 million bonus this year, which was a 20% increase on last year's, then people are going to think, well, why? Why is that director getting a bonus, a raise, when the company has done worse this year than it did last year? The company didn't meet any of its targets. It was supposed to be trying to break even this year, and it made millions in losses, yet you've given the director a bigger bonus than you even did last year. That's the kind of thing that will really frustrate the public, turn the public against the organisation, turn the shareholders against the organisation, turn the other stakeholders, such as the employees, against the organisation. And that is what governance tries to overcome. It's also worth pointing out that governance has a risk management focus, particularly with regards to the audit committee. So the audit committee is often in charge of creating things like risk registers and other things like that ensure that risks are being dealt with. Because it's one thing to identify risks, it's another to actively go about mitigating the impact of those risks. And that's one of the values of corporate governance. Financial reporting and control, also very important, ensuring that all the statements are done as per the laws of the particular country in which the organisation operates in. Ensuring that directors have all the information they need, because of course they can't really be judged on their decision making if they aren't given the amount of information given. So this system is to ensure that all executive directors are provided with all the information that they need to facilitate good decision making. And with regards to decision making, that all directors are involved in it. And this means even if it means taking, something as simple as a show of hands, just ensuring that everyone is involved. Often, in certain situations, if you've got, say, founders of the company still sitting on the board, the founders are very powerful. Everyone agrees with what the founder says. And that's against governance. The whole point of a board is that there is a consensus amongst a group of people rather than one person making all the decisions. So if that isn't happening, if one person or two people or half the board are far too powerful, then that goes against the point of a board and thus against the point of good corporate governance. And regular meetings with both institutional shareholders and all shareholders at the annual general meeting. Institutional shareholders, of course, being things like your pension schemes and your big stakeholders, big shareholders like that. And it's important that we do this because of the fact that they have a lot of money invested within the organisation. If they were to take their money out of the organisation, it could cause a lot of problems with the market because the share price might drop
as people may be thinking that there's something wrong with the organisation or it's on the decline because this major institutional shareholder has decided to take their money out of it. So that is governance from a theoretical perspective.
So that's the theory of governance. Let's look at how it could be applied to us here at Shinepodd. Well, there is the potential for agency problem here because there isn't an issue where we have a founder at the organisation who's very powerful, which can be a governance issue in itself, but often when a founder is involved in the organisation, they do keep it in check a bit more because it's their business. They don't want anything bad to happen to it. They want to run it for the longevity of it. They don't want to run it purely to get as much money out of it as they can in the short term. And because the founder has left the company many years ago now, it's very much just a corporate company now. And we have board members who are not necessarily twined with the organisation particularly. Quite a few of them had only joined in the last couple of years, and as a result they probably don't have too much affinity with the organisation itself. So there is the potential for the agency problem to arise here, and this occurs when you have people running the organisation on behalf of the owners. And sometimes you have situations where the directors are going to get big bonuses if they increase profit by a certain percent in the short term. And if that is the case, then you end up with situations where they are leveraging the long-term sustainability of the company with the short-term growth to get their bonuses, and then they'll move on and go and work at another organisation. And of course, we don't want to do that because we are a company that cares about sustainability. Sustainability was frequently mentioned throughout the pre-scene. But the governance was generally very good at this organisation. And there is a requirement within Midland for organisations to do it. And even if there wasn't, they should be doing it anyway because it's ultimately the best way in which organisations are run for all shareholders and stakeholders. And we have a balanced number of non-executive directors and executive directors. We could potentially add one more non-executive director to even it up. But this is useful because they do bring wider experience to the board, and particularly a lot of the non-executive directors had experience in other organizations related to the coffee industry as well. And their purpose is to review and check the board decisions as well as staff the various different committees, of which there were 3 at the organization: the Remuneration, Risk and Audit Committee. Interestingly enough, there was no mention of a nomination committee, and the nomination committee are there to ensure that the right people are promoted to the director level within the organisation, also in charge of succession planning as well, which can be very important for the organisation because the share price can take a dip if a senior director leaves the organisation. There's no plan in place to replace them. An example of that was with Tesla, and the finance director left Tesla, and it caused a huge impact on the share price because there was no plan in place to replace them. They just randomly and sporadically left. Admittedly, they made some public critiques of the organisation, the way the organisation was run, which would of course had another impact on the share price. But once a director had been appointed, the share price did begin to rebound. So the moral there is that if you already have plans in place, then as soon as they leave, you can appoint the next person to that position, and that should smooth out the troubles with the organisation and with the share price. And also one thing as well, there was no mention of talks, no mentions of meetings. We know that good governance will have an annual general meeting with all shareholders and also more regular meetings with important external stakeholders such as institutional shareholders. And that's also a key part of your role within the CIMA exam. One of the core activities, one of the ICANN statements, was to liaise with external shareholders and important stakeholders towards the organisation. There was no mention of that within the pre-scene in the section on governance. And so that's perhaps a failing on the part of the company with regards to governance if that is the case. So thank you for watching this video. I hope you have enjoyed it, and more importantly, you have found it useful. I'd like to finish by just telling you a few things about the products that we produce here at Astranti and the ones that are part of our course. So these materials can all be purchased as part of the course or purchased individually. So we have our study text. We have 3 study texts for all the objective test exams. So 3 study texts for E1, P1, F2, F3, etc. But we also have the study text specifically for the case study exams, split into 2 parts. The first is about how to approach the exam, how to analyze the information, how to plan your answers, how to write your answers, and also the second part, which looks at the key theories from the objective test levels that are relevant to the particular case study. So if you are looking at P2, F2, E2 for the management exam, F3, P3, E3 for the strategic case study exam, and so on. We have our course videos, which look at how to plan your answers, how to manage your time effectively. These are the key reasons why people fail the exam. We have our pre-scene analysis, which looks at the pre-scene in a lot of depth, applies key information to that, and also concludes with the strategic analysis, where we look at the various different models in the CIMA syllabus and apply them to the case, and also the top 10 most likely issues to arise in your exam. Generally, we have a 70 to 80% accuracy rate on our top 10 issues. Our industry pack, which details in great depth the history and the current contemporary issues within the particular industry that the pre-scene is based on. We also have 20 to 25 industry examples that you can use within your answers. We have mock exams that can be purchased with or without marking and feedback, where you can get some real exam practice in, look for the kinds of things that the examiner is going to bring up in the exam, and also get marking and feedback from expert markers who have marked for CIMA and for us for many years, who know exactly the kinds of things that the examiner is looking for, exactly the kinds of mistakes that students often make, and can provide lots of detailed feedback to ensure that you improve on your performance. We also have our master classes, which are 2 day-long classes which look at all the key issues facing students in the exam. We will also go through live planning, showing you how to plan your answers effectively, how to write your answers effectively. Again, key things that cause people to fail the strategic case study exam, or any of the case study exams for that matter. And also, if you do sign up for our course, provided that you have filled out your forms, provided that you have submitted your mocks, provided you have done everything to show that you have really given it your all to try and pass this exam, we also offer a pass guarantee, giving a free resit to anyone who fails the exam.